So we were out here with a mascot. He needs a walk. It's wet, a little bit cold, but you got to get him out there. You know, I'll never really understand the aversion to healthcare in America. Healthcare is incredibly expensive, and Medicaid, Medicare provide healthcare for millions of Americans. And it's something in the new polls, more than half of people who voted for Donald Trump are actually opposed to cuts to Medicare. But last night, Trump's new bill was passed through the House. It was rushed through. And it seems to be before anyone could actually read it, because there's people actually calling out, what were the changes? What were the changes? But changes were made, and apparently it was the cuts made to Medicare, instead of it happening over a few years, and food assistance, instead of it happening over a few years, makes it more immediate, but still keeps all the tax cuts for the billionaires and the millionaires out there, while taking health care away from poor people. It's an amazing thing we have in our country. We're willing to sacrifice things that the rest of the world sees as basic, sees it as things that you just have, right? Healthcare isn't seen as a luxury in the rest of the world. Healthcare is seen as a human right, something that just everyone has. And as far as Americans go, they don't really seem to understand what healthcare is like in other countries. There's just this big assumption that it's just a nightmare, that nobody gets anything done, or that it's just too expensive, and that the rest of the world suffers such high taxes that it just makes life unaffordable. But there's a reason why Europeans don't come to America for a better life. There's a reason why people move to Europe and other, let's just say, more civilized parts of the world to actually live a good, decent life, where they don't have to worry about the same kind of things that we worry about here. But it's still amazing to me, and I know I shouldn't be surprised at this point, that our country still would push tax cuts for the wealthiest people, believing that it's going to enrich them. Well, for decades, we've seen that trickle-down economics, it isn't a thing. It doesn't help us out. It doesn't help anybody out. It's a myth. It's a myth. Nothing trickles down. There's a reason why the wealth disparity in America right now is as high as it is. It's higher than it's ever been before. And that's because we've just been following this kind of idea of trickle-down economics for, like I said, decades, way before I was born. But we've entered this new era where that disparity is so insane, and these tycoons, these oligarchs, technocrats, they have so much wealth now that we're entering a kind of an era of tycoons again. These are the people who are going to be driving society. They're going to be driving culture, making the big decisions. Taking that power of choice away from Americans, away from the working class, the working poor. And as we're seeing, as the wealth disparity grows and grows and grows, that the size of the working class grows and grows and grows, because middle class, upper middle class, they're still living paycheck to paycheck. When 70% of Americans don't have $1,000 in their savings account, I would consider that 70% of Americans who are the working poor. Because if you don't have $1,000, and today $1,000 is nothing. It's nothing. It gets you nothing. It's like 2 weeks groceries for a family. You're working class. We have this thing where we chase the identity. We want to be a higher class. In America, it's a fascinating thing to chase this kind of identity. Perception of lifestyle. We're always willing to sacrifice the common basic human needs to the poorest. In anthropology, you have this thing called sacrifice zones, but this is almost becoming like an economic sacrifice zone, where if you exist within this certain population, if you exist within this certain population, your needs don't matter, your opinions don't matter, your life doesn't matter, your health doesn't matter, what you need, for your family doesn't matter. It falls to the wayside to satisfy the elites. It falls to the wayside, to satisfy a cry for consumerism. It's a real poisonous and toxic part of our society, of our culture. And it makes America fairly disgusting in a way. It's also just a kind of like mass denial when it comes to a lot of these cuts, because as we've seen, from a lot of the hearings, that the cuts to income tax, the cuts to tax on tips, overtime tax, they come with restrictions. They don't actually do anything. The cuts to food assistance, the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, that does have a huge impact, right? That is doing something. And it's all going to pay for these massive tax cuts to the wealthy. This isn't going to benefit Americans in any way, not in the long run. I don't even think in the short term it's going to benefit anybody. It's going to benefit donors. I mean, that's what this whole thing's about. It's going to benefit, like I said, the wealthy and the elite. And this kind of idea that it's going to cause jobs to just appear in an era where tariffs are driving fear in the markets and corporations are consolidating and cutting people loose. The only thing it could be would be by cutting taxes to the wealthiest people and the corporations, and keeping the tariffs on. It really, even if it cuts taxes, it negates the effects of cutting taxes on tips and overtime, because those costs are going to be pushed on the same people who are anticipating taxes on their tips and overtime being taken away. So really, none of this does anything for anyone except take away healthcare and food assistance from the needy. That's all that it does. And again, the impacts on this are severe, because America has a problem as it is. And like I said, when you've lived in a place where healthcare is affordable, it means that when you live in a place where healthcare is accessible to everybody, it means that people use healthcare. In America, people don't go to the doctor. They don't go to the doctor because they know it can be too expensive. They know that it can put them into severe debt. It can be a debt that you can't pay, and then it can ruin your credit score, and you can't get anything. You can't get a house, can't get a car, can't take a loan out to buy food. You can't do anything. That's the price of debt in America. You're expected to take it on, but at the same time, you have to constantly be able to pay. So it just keeps you in that same cycle forever. And that's the point. But pushing through this bill and making these changes, while at the same time not allowing opposition to be able to have the time to read it, is something that's really typical in American society, or in American government. And this is a problem that's been going on, I mean, God, since I can remember. These big bills are pushed. Over 1,000 pages, this bill is. To make these changes, not let anyone see it and just push it through. This is something that happens all the time. And that's why it's pretty common to have a bill be proposed that has a real nice name, right? Usually not as silly as the big, beautiful tax bill. And these bills usually have so much that are jam-packed in it that the public doesn't actually know about. Or they are told about that, but at the same time, they'll kind of not believe it. It's a strange thing, because there's so much distrust in our government. But when your side's in charge, you just believe wholeheartedly that they're doing everything they say that they're doing. Although it's the exact same people. It's the exact same people that have been in the exact same seats forever. And while a lot of people will argue that, no, they're two different parties, and I say, yeah, they have two different philosophies on governing. But they're at the same parties with each other. They go to the same functions with each other. Beyond the political dialogue that's on mainstream media, these people know each other. They're in each other's lives. It's to think that they operate, so far away from each other. And there are a few like that out there. There are a few good politicians, but the vast, vast majority of them are just kind of in this together. They'll say no on something when it's safe to say no. If it gets them political points, if they're in a purple district. But for the most part, they're just going to follow party lines. We'll take this bill, for example. There were 6 Republicans who said no originally. I think it was 6. And that looks good for them. It looks like, hey, we're challenging this to make more changes. But it just made the bill more aggressive to cut Medicare. Say that they actually wanted to oppose it. They can't. They can't. Because they know that in the end, they would lose their seats in the House or in Congress, especially in this political situation that we're in, where the president, one person, has so much power over an entire party. And he's shown before that if you question him, you'll never work in DC again. This is a huge problem because it leads to anything that he wants being passed. It is a dictatorship. In a way, it is a dictatorship. You cannot argue that. And what's even weirder is that a lot of people will say, well, at least he's getting things done. I may not like what he's doing, but hey, at least he's making change. He's getting things done. And to that I say, what a weird way to look at the world. You know, even if someone's doing things that are hurting you in the long run, or hurting your friends, or hurting your family, hurting the elderly, hurting the poor. But hey, at least they're getting something done. That's terrible. That's terrible. No, I mean, if someone's getting things done aggressively and it's going in the direction that it's hurting the American people, or hurting any people from any government, any country, you know, that you should be opposed to that. You know, you should be like, if I was a Republican, right? If I was a Republican and I saw that this was going to hurt my family's ability to access health care, you know, the elderly, and move to kind of cripple the healthcare system, I'd be like, yeah, I don't like this. I don't agree with this. You know, we need to stop this somehow. Like I said, more than half of Trump's supporters don't want cuts to Medicaid. So it doesn't matter what you want, really. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter. It never really mattered what you wanted. This is what they wanted the whole time. Tax cuts for the rich. That's what they wanted the whole time. And they disguised it in a bill called the Big Beautiful Tax Bill, and everyone's supporting it. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. The ramifications of this will be severe. Lives will be lost because of things like this. It's an inevitability. And it's tragic. Because you know what would be best? It'd be best if we had a country where we didn't have to worry about healthcare, like pretty much every country in Europe. If we can afford the military spending that we do, we can certainly afford healthcare, at least for the most vulnerable. You know, if you don't have employer-based healthcare, you can't afford healthcare. Paying for healthcare on your own, paying for Obamacare is super expensive. You definitely need to live alone at that point. You're just trying to pay for that for a family, you know, without insurance through your employer. It's like $20,000 a year. Nobody can afford that. That's why it's so strange to the rest of the world when they look in and see how our healthcare works, how our lack of healthcare works. And like I said, it's just sad that we do it to ourselves. We punish ourselves in a way that we don't need to. I do love walking in parks again. I miss my walk and talk videos. Like through the entire winter, it's been so cold here. I haven't been able to, but it's nice we're getting to the point where we can do that again. And maybe it makes the conversations a little more lively because we're getting some fresh air, getting some exercise, you know, out with the pooch. You know, is it Greece? No, it's not Greece. But one day, soon enough, you know, things are in motion, and it is an inevitability that we are leaving. So there's no way we really plan on staying here. There's not really the same benefits as there used to be. You make more money here, but it's just too expensive. And if you want to have a family, it's incredibly expensive. If you want to have a family anywhere in the world, it's so much cheaper than it is here. So much cheaper. I mean, you have to pay to have a family here. It makes it just a bad financial decision to have a family in America, honestly. But yeah. Anyway, hey, thanks for joining us today out here. You know, the birds are chirping. We got the church right there. Good time. Nice trees. Yeah, nice maple tree. But hey, hope you guys have a great week. I'm still on paternity leave and I'm enjoying it. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.